Tomorrow marks 12 months since the brutal Hamas attack on Israel. A year on, the Middle East conflict is only escalating. Social tension here is only rising, and the political divide has dramatically widened. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Israel is continuing its attacks in Lebanon as we go to air this morning, hitting targets near Beirut and also overnight Tripoli in the country's north. We'll cross to John Lyons in Beirut for the latest shortly. Israel, meanwhile, continues its campaign in Gaza and has issued evacuation orders for 2 refugee camps there. And the big question now is how it will hit back at Iran. The main backer of the terrorist organisations Hamas and Hezbollah fired a barrage of missiles directly at Israel earlier in the week. 12 months on from the October 7 Hamas atrocity, the region is on the brink of a wider war. Today, pro-Palestinian protests will be held in Australian cities. Police will be out in force. The Prime Minister and opposition leader have both condemned protests on this anniversary. But that's about all they agree on.
Israel has begun its ground offensive into the south.
These localized ground raids will target Hezbollah strongholds.
Breaking news from the Middle East. Iran launched a ballistic missile attack against Israel.
What the? This is a sound of interceptions happening straight above us in northern Israel.
Based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective.
Iran made a big mistake tonight, and it will pay for it.
Tonight's operation will be repeated several times stronger.
For revenge of the blood of the innocent children of Gaza and also the resilience of innocent people of Lebanon.
Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel.
We stand with Israel and we recognise her right to self-defence.
Israel has a right to defend itself against these attacks. We've urged all parties to show restraint and de-escalate.
To call for a ceasefire at this time, when Israel is defending herself, I think speaks very poorly of this government.
Hands off Lebanon!
Should pro-Palestinian protests go ahead this weekend?
Well, there certainly shouldn't be any protests on October 7 because...
Why not?
Because it would be seen, I think, as incredibly provocative.
I don't accept that it's provocative. We have 51 weeks in a row. You said largely peaceful. I'm telling you, absolutely peaceful.
People should not be protesting on October the 7th.
But surely one of the other 364 days of the year would be more appropriate.
The government should be doing everything they can to stop these protests from taking place.
Pro-Palestinian events in both Melbourne and Sydney will go ahead, despite calls to have them shut down.
The protest organisers have agreed that no flags, portraits or symbols connected to a prohibited terrorist organisation will be displayed.
There has been a different tone, and that is what we are concerned about.
I say to others who are thinking of other actions on October 7, think about whether your cause is being advanced or set back. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Thank you.
My guest this morning is the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, Richard Marles. First, let's check what's making news. Israel has expanded its attacks in Lebanon with further strikes against Hezbollah targets near Beirut. An airstrike in the northern city of Tripoli also killed another senior Hamas leader. Meanwhile, more than 450 Australians and their family members have now left Beirut on flights organised by the Australian government. Further evacuation flights to Cyprus are scheduled for later today. And finally, former Labor Senator Fatima Payman, who now sits as an independent, will announce the creation of her new party later this week. The party won't carry her name and it won't be a religious-based party focused only on Muslim Australians. The plan is to run Senate candidates in every state. More on that later. Let's get the latest now, though, from Beirut. The ABC's Global Affairs editor, John Lyons, is there. And I spoke to him a short time ago. John, good to see you there. Thanks for joining us. Just give us a bit of an update of what's been happening there overnight, our time in Beirut.
Well, David, there continue to be airstrikes, probably not as heavy as in the last few nights overnight, but there have been some. The Israelis have been bombing or hitting with drones different parts of Lebanon, where I am, in the south of Lebanon, in the southern suburbs of Beirut, which is behind me, in the Bekaa Valley, and there have been some today in the centre of Lebanon. And today we've seen the first two of the planes leaving to evacuate Australians. They've happened today. There'll be another two tomorrow. And so the evacuations are now underway.
And I guess everybody is waiting to see how Israel will respond to Iran and when that's going to happen. What do you think we should be expecting?
Well, David, the strong expectation here in Lebanon and across the Arab world, and in fact in Israel as well, is that Israel will strike fairly soon. It could be in the next 24 hours. It could be tonight here. And it's expected that the debate is what they do, or the discussion between the Americans and the Israelis is what facilities do they hit. The Americans have made it very clear, President Biden, that he does not want the Israelis to hit either oil facilities, which could prompt a global energy and economic crisis, or Iran's nuclear facilities. And the strong word out of Washington is that the Israelis have refused to give that commitment. And so then, of course, the concern here in Lebanon, which is one of the Hezbollah here, is of course one of Iran's strongest proxies, if not the strongest, what they will do and what Iran will do. Now, the big sort of weapon, if you like, that Hezbollah has and that Iran has through Hezbollah is those 150,000 or so missiles believed to be in the south of Lebanon, south of the Litani River. And so the worst case scenario would be if Tehran gave the go-ahead for Hezbollah to fire a number of those 150,000 missiles, which, as good as Israel's Iron Dome system is, a large number of missiles from the south of Lebanon towards Israel would probably overwhelm the Iron Dome system.
And John, just while you were giving that answer then, we did see a couple of flashes over your shoulder. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm not sure if you could hear that. Just explain to us again, we are looking into the southern parts of Beirut there. This would presumably be further Israeli strikes?
That's right, David. That is behind me. That is the Dahia, which is the stronghold in Beirut of Hezbollah. And there have been strikes in the last few days. There have been some earlier today in that part of Beirut. You'll sometimes see those explosions. There's been smoke hanging over those areas for much of the day, and that's been the hardest hit area. And some nights here, the sounds, the explosions have been extremely loud, and it looks like the Israelis may be hitting it again right now.
John Lyons, appreciate the update. Stay safe. Thank you. Well, let's go now to the ABC's Nick Dole in Sydney, where a major protest will be taking place today, as it will be in Melbourne. Nick, thanks for your time. What are police expecting there today?
Hi there, David. Well, they're expecting big numbers. Exactly how big, no one can say it for sure, but protest organisers think it could be at least 5,000. And the potential size of that crowd was one of the reasons that police went to court last week, initially to try to stop this protest taking place. In the end, protest organisers and police came to an arrangement, and so it will still take effect today. It's going to start here in Hyde Park at 1 p.m. and move through the streets. But protest organisers say there will be a slight change to that route just to ensure that the Great Synagogue isn't affected. Now, those protest organisers, they have argued in court, and they continue to argue now, that their protests over the last year really have been peaceful, and they expect that to continue. But I think it's fair to say there will be a huge police presence here, given the presence of Hezbollah flags in the crowd. Of course, Hezbollah is a prescribed terrorist organisation. Merely bringing a flag may put someone in criminal at criminal risk, and so a big police presence here. I can see they've already got CCTV cameras erected on poles, and really, I think everyone is just hoping that the next 24 hours or so goes off without incident.
And tomorrow, Nick, is of course the October 7 anniversary. Tell us what's actually planned for tomorrow at this stage.
Well, the Jewish community will be marking the anniversary of the October 7 terrorist attacks by Hamas with a candlelight vigil here in Sydney and mourning the victims. But at the same time, pro-Palestinian groups will also be holding what they are calling a candlelight vigil. It's going to be held at Town Hall not far from here. And they say they have a right to do that. They say they will be mourning the victims of Israel's ensuing military action. Some of the Jewish leaders here in Sydney have described those events as shameful, and as you've heard, the Prime Minister, the Premier, the opposition leader have all said they don't believe any event should take place on October 7. There won't be a permit for that either, but they say they don't need that because they won't be moving. Now, right. There is also another event planned in Western Sydney at Lakemba at the mosque. That is being supported by a range of Muslim groups, but it's also been linked to the fundamentalist group Hizb ut-Tahrir. Now, when Anthony Albanese was asked about those reports earlier, he condemned Hizb ut-Tahrir. He said he's got no time for that group, and he didn't think, in his words, that those rallies should be sanctioned, but they are going ahead, they are approved, and New South Wales Police say that they'll be working with those organisers to make sure it goes off without any incident.
Well, we'll have a busy couple of days ahead. Nick Dole, thank you very much for that. Well, let's bring in our panel now, see what they have to make of all of this. We're joined this week by Nikki, Savva, Phil Coorey and Katina. Very good morning to all of you.
Dave.
Look, a lot to discuss. Let's start on the evacuations of the Australians out of Beirut. Nikki, we know the government's been warning and urging for weeks, months. Now we've seen flights probably about half full by the sounds of it. Worth noting, though, it's not easy for many who are there in Beirut to get to the airport when you look at where these Israeli missiles are dropping not too far from that airport.
Well, that's true, and it's a great pity that these flights have been put on and they're departing half full. But part of the problem is that people are finding it difficult to get to the airport. The other part of the problem, I think, is that people are still thinking they can ride it out. And I understand that is a bit of a frustration inside the government because they have been warning for so long, as you say, for, in fact, almost a year now, telling people not to travel to Lebanon, and if they're there, to get out while they can. And there are people who are still resisting that call, and I think they're playing with
Phil,
fire.
I mean, you know Lebanon pretty well. What is that sentiment, do you think, at the moment for the Aussies who would be there? And
it depends where you are. I mean, there's an estimated 15,000 there. Not all those 15,000 are in danger. Up the north, it's pretty benign. I mean, they've been sitting in those mountains since the Crusades, riding things out, and it's in the Christian areas and stuff. We saw the bombing in Tripoli. That's a Muslim sort of stronghold in the north, but otherwise it's sort of Israel's attention is focused around the south and over in the Bekaa Valley. So it's not true to say all those Australians in Lebanon are in dire trouble. It's in certain areas. So, and look, we're lucky the airport's still open, to be honest, because I mean, usually the first thing the Israelis do is they hit the airport at Beirut because it stops the Iranians bringing in more weapons and support for Hezbollah. They did that in 2006. I was at that airport just this time last year, and it was all brand new and shiny. And the time I was there before was all full of holes and blowing up. And I was thinking, I wonder how long this will last. But so the government is lucky, and the people they're getting out are lucky. The runway's still serviceable. It is on the Israeli target list. They said that about a week ago. And once they hit that runway, and that in 2006, the Howard government, when they got thousands of people out, they couldn't use the airport because it had been hit, and they were using ferries to Cyprus. And I know the government has combed Europe for spare ferries, and they have them on standby. That'll be the fallback plan to take people from Beirut to Cyprus as well. So she's a bit of a mess, but you get out there. And the road to Damascus, obviously, through the Bekaa Valley.
Is that still open, though, I think?
No, they hit it right on the Syrian border. Again, I was driving on that last year.
Right.
And my driver said, this is another thing they'll hit. But in 2006, you could go through Syria. Now you don't want to go through Syria because it's dodgy there. So the options are a lot more limited, and we're lucky we've got those air flights at the moment. Yeah. I wouldn't count on that for too long.
No, all right. Well, look, we'll hear a bit more from Richard Marles shortly on all of that. To the debate, the bigger debate right now between the two sides of politics here in Australia, which has been going for 12 months. We know about how supportive the government should be of Israel and so on. It really is right now about whether Israel has a right to respond to what Iran did earlier this week with the barrage of missiles. And look, the government is sticking to a set of words here that it has a right to defend itself. Have a look.
Israel has a right to defend itself against these attacks.
Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. But as we in the US and others have said, the region needs de-escalation. The cycle of violence cannot continue without end, and that is something that we will continue to work with partners on.
This call for a ceasefire from the government that continues is something that Peter Dutton says is the wrong time to be suggesting.
For our Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister to call for a ceasefire at this time, when Israel is defending herself, I think speaks very poorly of this government.
So, Katina, can you explain to us why the government is saying only it has a right to defend itself, but not going as far as Joe Biden, the Americans, saying it has a right to respond to Iran?
Yeah, I think they're trying to walk a really careful line here. And I guess the tricky thing is, when does the right to defend turn into sort of full-on retaliation, and how does that, which could spill over into then full-on war, which no one wants. The Americans have said as well, like Joe Biden has said, yes, they do have a right to hit back, but, show some restraint. The G7 leaders issued a statement this week, led by Biden, talking about making sure that everyone acts responsibly in the Middle East conflict. So
yeah, and that G7 statement seemed to back the right to respond.
Yes.
And Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, he's just spoken in the last couple of hours as well, and he's made it very clear he's going to respond.
Although we have not yet removed the threat, we have changed the balance of the war. We have the duty and the right to respond to the Iranian attack, and we will do so.
Yeah, Nikki, it's this right to respond, that we hear from Netanyahu, Joe Biden. Why not Anthony Albanese, do you think?
Well, look, I think a lot of this is word games as well.
So you think when he says right to defend, that
of course
means the right to respond?
Well, of course it does. I mean, how else do you defend yourself if you don't respond? But it also means that when you respond, you have to conform to international law. So this is why they're saying, yes, defend yourself, but don't cross the line here when it comes to the way that you do it and the number of civilian lives that you take in the process.
So do you think is the Australian government out of step at all with the Americans here, as Peter Dutton says, or do you think, Phil, that they're on the same page?
Well, I think they're more on the same page than not. Respond, defend, it's the same thing. We've had Iran attack Israel. Israel's never attacked Iran. Iran attacked Israel. It's a sovereign state, thousands of kilometres away. It's the second time they've hit them now. In what is an admission by Iran that it is backing these proxies, Hezbollah and the rest of it. And if Israel responds and hits military targets, that's a form of defence. Of course it is, but like they did in their first response. But I think what worries everyone is just the potential for escalation. And Israel is a nuclear-armed country. Iran wants nuclear arms. It's not far off. We keep reading. So.
No one wants to get to that point.
No. But if I don't know what Israel's going to do if they take out more missile batteries like they did last time.
Exactly. We'll see. And look, I want to come back to the discussion around the Iranian ambassador and whether he should be staying in Australia and the protests that are coming today and tomorrow. Time now, though, to talk to the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, Richard Marles. And to take us there, he was the US President on this issue of Israel's right to respond.
If I were in those shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields. The Israelis have every right to respond to the vicious attacks on them, not just from the Iranians, but from everyone from Hezbollah to Houthis to... Anyway.
Richard Marles, welcome to the program.
Morning, David.
So can you just clear this up for us? Is the US president right? Do you agree with Joe Biden that Israel has a right to respond to Iran?
Yes, and actually I think Nikki Savva in her last contribution really spoke to exactly what the position of the government is. I mean, we've talked about the fact that Israel clearly has a right to defend itself, and that does include a right to respond, but the manner in which it defends itself obviously matters. And we really have been in lockstep with the United States over the last few weeks in respect of all of this. I mean, when we've talked about a ceasefire, that has been echoing the call that the United States made, along with other members of the international community, to which we added our voice. And from the get-go, I mean, since October 7 last year, we've made it completely clear that Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel was attacked on October 7. Hezbollah had a whole lot of choices, but it chose in the aftermath of October 7 to also attack Israel along with Hamas. Iran has been attacking Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself in the face of all of that. The manner in which it defends itself clearly matters. But what's also true, David, is that what we've seen is a cycle of violence here. And no one wants to see this escalate into a broader conflict, into a regional war. A lot of the effort that the United States has been leading with the international community has been to try and avoid a wider conflict, a regional war. And the ceasefire which it called for a week or two ago was about trying to give both sides an opportunity to break that cycle of violence, to allow UN security resolutions to have effect, which would provide for diplomatic measures to allow those who live near the Israeli-Lebanese border to return with security. Now, we added our voice to that, to the call of the United States, and so we are on exactly the same page as the US.
And does that extend to suggesting Israel should not hit Iran's nuclear facilities or oil facilities? Is that the same position you take?
Well, I mean, we haven't gone into the specifics of it. The manner in which they respond clearly matters, and we certainly take note of what America said in relation to their engagement with Israel. We're obviously not in the same circumstance of America in terms of having that level of engagement with Israel, but you know, to make clear that how Israel defends itself, how it responds, clearly matters, and we've made that clear from the outset as well. But I'd want to make this point, David. I think, you know, the reason, in a sense, we're having this conversation, the reason that you're kind of forced into interrogating differences of words between respond and defend is because what we've seen on the part of the opposition leader is an attempt to create division in this moment. Now, he's out there saying that we're at odds with our allies. That is a patent lie. And it's an intentional lie, and it's a lie intended to create division within Australian politics and from there within Australian society. And really, you know, we've seen a consistent pattern from Peter Dutton over the course of the last 12 months in respect of this, which frankly has surprised me. I mean, I get the business of opposition is to oppose. I spent 9 years in opposition, so I understand the difficulty of what it is to be in opposition. But you would imagine that there are some matters which are not on the table, which are above politics. This is a tragedy that has been playing out in the Middle East. It is obviously difficult. It is obviously complex. The position of the government has been clear, and what we have seen is Peter Dutton seeking to exploit this moment to create division in Australian society, and that should be condemned.
I'll come back to some of those points of political division, but can you tell us the latest on the evacuation of Australians from Lebanon? More than 400 have left, I think, over the past week. We were talking, though, about how difficult the security situation is there to get to the airport for many of those Australians. Is there anything you can do about that, or is this just the reality of the situation?
Well, it is the reality of the situation. The suburb in Beirut, where there is a Hezbollah presence, is not far from the airport, and so we have seen strikes near the airport. But thankfully, at this moment, the airport remains open. You're right that in the last 24 hours, we've had a couple of flights leave Beirut for Cyprus, on which we've been able to assist more than 400, largely Australian citizens, but under our guys to leave Beirut. That takes to a total of more than 450 over the course of the last week. There's a couple more flights leaving Beirut today, Lebanon time, and we will be hoping to see more Australians on those flights as well. And then we've got arrangements with Qatar Airways and Qantas to fly those Australians from Cyprus back to Australia. Again, our message, which we've been repeating for some time now, is this is the time to leave. The airport remains open, which is a blessing. It's really important that people take the opportunity to leave. We've got about 3,600 Australians who have now registered with our embassy in Beirut, expressing a desire to have some form of assisted departure, and we will continue to work with them and to provide those opportunities to leave. But people simply have to take those opportunities as they are provided.
Would you call on Israel to pause its pursuit of Hezbollah for 24 hours so people can travel in safety to the airport?
Well, I mean, we end up down the path that we've speaking about earlier. I mean, we've made our positions clear. Look, we're very focused on the Australians who are in Lebanon. As you've been articulating, there is a very significant Australian population
just to this point, though,
in Lebanon.
Should Israel be attacking Hezbollah targets in Lebanon or not?
Well, we've made clear that Israel has a right to defend itself. So we're back on the territory that we were before, and we have made that clear.
But I guess what I'm asking is what that means for those trying to get out of Lebanon. What does it mean in practice? Do you think Israel should stop?
Well, again, we've expressed our view here that in practice, the situation in Lebanon is very difficult, which is why we have been very clear for months now that now is the time to leave, and now literally is the time to leave. I mean, we are providing for flights. There will be 2 more today. It matters that people take the seats that are available to them. I mean, you've been pointing out that there have been seats that we have provided which have not been taken up during the course of the last week. It was better yesterday in terms of 400 odd taking the opportunity to leave. We will continue to do what we can to provide assisted departure for Australians in Lebanon, but all of this is obviously taking place in an extremely difficult situation. And we have, we've got other preparations on plan in plans. We do have a couple of C-130 Hercules aircraft which are in Cyprus right now. There is a C-17 Royal Australian Air Force plane which is on the ground in Cyprus right now, and it will be relocating elsewhere in the region. We've got Defence Force personnel on the ground in Cyprus. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of operations which are going on to try and assist in this moment, but people need to take the opportunities which are being provided to them.
I'm keen for your thoughts at this sort of 12-month anniversary of the October 7 attacks. To perspective, obviously, on what's been happening. Israel's view is that, it was subjected to this brutal Hamas attack. It's been copying rocket fire from Hezbollah for the last 12 months. And yes, it's weakened both of these terrorist organisations, but clearly sees now as an opportunity to create more security for itself and its citizens. Do you accept that sentiment, that view from Israel as to why it's doing what it's doing?
Well, I mean, as we approach the 12-month anniversary, I think the starting point is to acknowledge what occurred on October 7 last year, and that is that Israel was attacked. More than 1,000 innocent lives were lost in a country with a population of less than 10 million. This was a brutal attack by Hamas, a terrorist organisation. And, you know, on the 12-month anniversary of that, all of us, I think, see this as a very solemn occasion in which to remember these appalling events. More than 200 people were taken hostage, a number of whom remain hostages to this day. This is an appalling set of circumstances. And from the outset, we made clear, as I said earlier, Israel's right to defend itself. And we've also made clear over the course of the last 12 months, David, that how it defends itself will be judged. How it defends itself
and that's what I'm keen to get to as well, because the other perspective here is, you know, over this last 12 months, we've seen more than 40,000 people die in Gaza, according to the Gazan health authorities. Now more than 2,000 people die in Lebanon, according to the health authorities there. When you say Israel has a right to defend itself, is that the sort of defence that's justified?
Oh, well, I think as we have seen tens of thousands of innocent lives lost in Gaza, and indeed innocent lives lost in Lebanon, we are, of course, horrified by that. I am horrified by that. The government is. I think Australians are and the world is. That's what we mean by the fact that how Israel defends itself matters. How it defends itself will be judged.
And how do you judge it? How do you judge it at this 12-month mark?
I think that loss of life is unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. And that's why, you know, we have, over the course of the last 12 months, used our voice to advocate, along with others in the international community, for an end to these hostilities, to allow humanitarian efforts to take place, to support those. I mean,
has
Israel what we have seen in the Middle East is an absolute catastrophe.
Has Israel acted in accordance with the rules of war?
We are deeply anxious and concerned about the activities that have ensued in the course of the last 12 months, which have seen such an extraordinary loss of innocent life in Gaza, and we are now seeing that loss of life in Lebanon. And that is why we describe this as a cycle of violence, because that is clearly what is going on here.
Has it been within the rules of our voice?
Well, all of that will ultimately be judged when the facts come out. But what matters is that we have been using our voice, David, to be calling for an end to these hostilities, and we have been doing that now for months, and we've been doing that in line with other countries around the world. Like-minded countries who similarly have looked on with a sense of horror at the loss of life which has ensued in Gaza.
The Foreign Minister has called for a timeline to be set for recognising a Palestinian state. Do you agree with Penny Wong on that? What sort of timeline do you have in mind?
Well, I definitely agree with the Foreign Minister. I mean, clearly everything that is occurring is happening in a context. And, you know, we have long supported, indeed it's been the bipartisan position in this country for decades, supporting a two-state solution. And I think one of the what comes from all that has played out in the last 12 months is the need to see a credible pathway forward which sees the achievement of that of a Palestinian state, the achievement of a two-state solution.
Could that happen without Israel's?
Is a part of that.
Could that happen without Israel's support? Would you want to see a Palestinian state recognised without Israel's support?
Well, I think what we want to see is a negotiated peace, and I mean the point there, and it's ultimately in part why a two-state solution can be the only solution. No matter what plays out, there are two peoples who will continue to live side by side.
Sure, but this is important. When you say a negotiated peace, are you saying it has to be negotiated with Israel?
What there needs to be, what there has to be now, is a credible pathway forward for the achievement of the Palestinian aspiration of its own state. That's what there needs to be. And the point I would make is that whichever way you look at it, these two peoples will be living side by side, and the only enduring way in which that will happen, which will provide security for both of those peoples, is if that occurs in a context of peace. Now, I get that seems very unattainable at this moment. That seems very far off to kind of almost talk about. That may seem trite, and yet that is the only goal, the only way in which we will have an enduring peace in the region, which will provide for the security of all those who live in the Middle East. And it's why, in part, why we have called for a two-state solution and continue to do so.
The government's defended allowing Iran's ambassador to stay in Australia. We know the opposition thinks he should go. Is the reason here that because America doesn't have diplomatic ties with Iran, Australia's diplomatic relationship is a back channel for the US?
Oh, look, I wouldn't comment on that, but I mean, this is about Australia's national interest. So again, to just be clear about what's happened, the tweets of the Iranian ambassador are utterly unacceptable. Tweeting in support of Hezbollah, a registered terrorist organisation, is utterly unacceptable. The Iranian ambassador was called in on Friday. This position was made very clear to him, as it was to the Iranian government by our representatives in Tehran. Now, we maintain diplomatic relations with a whole lot of countries, and a whole lot of countries with whom we have great differences. We have diplomatic representation at this moment with Russia, and precisely because we're seeing increasing tensions in the region means that the ability to have a direct means of communication actually is really significant for Australia's national interest, and that's why we will maintain that in place. That doesn't equal any acceptance of what Iran is saying. Indeed, we have been condemning Iran for a whole lot of its behaviours for a very long period of time. We condemn Iran for its attacks on Israel in the last few days, and we certainly condemn the Iranian ambassador for the tweets that he put out.
And just on the protests, are you opposed to the protest happening today as well as the events tomorrow, or are you more relaxed about the protest today?
Yes. No, I think the protests that are happening over the course of today and tomorrow are deeply regrettable. The anniversary of October 7 needs to be about October 7, and what happened on that day was the loss of more than 1,000 innocent lives, people going about their normal daily business in a peaceful way. I mean, young people attending a concert, people being taken hostage, a whole lot of whom remain hostages to this day. That it is a very solemn occasion. It's the anniversary of that we will be remembering today and tomorrow. And I think protests in support of Palestine on these days are very regrettable.
Just finally, while I've got you there, Defence Minister, the world, of course, has been watching the Middle East, and while all of this has been going on, China last week test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile with a dummy warhead in the Pacific. First time they've done this in decades. Why do you think China decided to test-fire an ICBM right now?
Well, it's a good question, and it's certainly a matter that we're very concerned about. Of course, this week I've been in Auckland at a meeting of South Pacific Defence Ministers, and in many ways that meeting happened in the shadow of that ICBM test. It traversed the whole lot of exclusive economic zones, the airspace of a number of Pacific nations, and you can be assured that this was a topic of significant conversation amongst us as Defence Ministers during the course of the week. I think what it demonstrates is that in our immediate region we face significant strategic contests, and that contest goes very much to our national security, and the Pacific remains a deep focus of our strategic interests and our diplomatic effort.
The Prime Minister, as I understand, is set to meet China's Premier Li on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Laos later this week. Should he raise this ICBM test with him and get some answers?
Well, I'm not going to speak for the Prime Minister in terms of this meeting, but I would make clear that we have, in the aftermath of this test, sought an explanation from China about what this test was about. We don't have clarity as to why China did this. anything which destabilises peace and security in our region is obviously something which is of enormous concern to Australia as it is to the countries of the Pacific.
Richard Marles, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
All right, a bit to unpack there. Let's get back to our panel, Nikki, Savva, Phil Coorey and Katina Curtis. Look, just picking up on the language about the right to respond, that is the first time we've heard a government minister use the language, but basically making your point, Nikki, that it's no different in their view to what they've been saying all week about the right to defend. Does that close this question, do you think, for the opposition?
Probably not. I think Mr Dutton, you know, makes a point of going out every single day and trying to find a point of difference. So, no, I don't think he'll be happy with that, but so be it.
Just on that, I mean, there was a really interesting couple times this week in Dutton's press conferences, there's sort of been this really awkward step change in his language where he's busy saying the Prime Minister is weak, he's not showing enough leadership, and then someone asked about the flights out of Lebanon and he suddenly switches and he says, oh, everyone should be listening to the Prime Minister and doing what he says on this. So, you know, he really is,
and then
he's playing both ways and then he switches back.
Well, one area where he certainly switches back is suggesting that Iran's ambassador to Australia should be kicked out. Here it is.
Do I think the Iranian ambassador should be expelled from our country? Should he be persona non grata? Absolutely he should. It's not his first time, and he's been warned by the government before. The Prime Minister has to start showing some strength of leadership.
But Phil, this, like Richard Marles was careful in describing why exactly we keep that diplomatic relationship, but there are a number of reasons, including our relationship with the US at play here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that absolutely, but it's entirely plausible. But it's outwardly it's difficult for the Prime Minister because they go and they warn this bloke, you know, tone it down, and he doesn't, and he just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and it, you know, it exposes the Prime Minister to those sorts of statements from Dutton. I think, you know, there's been calls before from Israel and the opposition to, you know, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to designate that.
Probably that's an arm of the Iranian government. So if you did that, that'd be diplomatic ties would be off.
That's right. But one of the other reasons we try and keep the door open with Iran, and nothing to do with the current situation, is because a lot of the illegal immigration that came here, the economic, but yeah, there were a lot of Iranians, and because they're not allowed back to Iran. If you leave Iran as an economic refugee and you're not accepted, they don't take you back, and that's been one of the biggest problems for this and former governments. With these, you know, these people have been on Nauru and places like that, and if you shut the door, then there's no prospect ever of repatriating them. So there's also a domestic element to keeping that door open as well.
And the protests, again here, Peter Dutton has argued that state and federal governments should be stopping somehow these protests happening. Now, clearly we heard it there from Richard Marles as well. They don't support these protests today or tomorrow. But, Nikki, you know, we have free speech, freedom of expression and so on. We are going to see protests today, vigils they're being called tomorrow as well, and they will offend a lot of Jewish Australians.
Without a doubt, I think. But, you know, I think one thing we need to remember is that we are where we are today because of what Hamas did on October 7. And what they did and the way they did it, they would have known exactly how Israel would have responded, and Hamas showed absolutely no concern for the Palestinian people, for ordinary civilians, and they went ahead and did it anyway.
With Iran's backing.
With Iran's backing. And I'm not excusing the excesses that have led to so many civilian deaths, but really it should be a day of mourning for everybody. You know,
because we can't ignore what's happened over the last 12 months.
We can't ignore how all this began and the atrocities that were committed that day. We shouldn't ignore them, we shouldn't excuse them, but nor should we excuse all the civilian casualties that have occurred since then.
And what happened last week? There were protests and the Hezbollah flag was flown after the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. Was there some confusion about whether that was a breach of this new law, the hate symbols law, or...?
I suspect it's partly because the law hasn't
been tested.
Like it hasn't been tested yet. And so maybe police on the ground weren't fully aware of the extent of the law, and, you know, they subsequently, once it became an issue, did go and they've charged someone in New South Wales. They're investigating a bunch of people in Victoria. So I think that now you would expect that all the police, the state police on the ground at these protests, would be fully cognisant of what the laws actually
and
are.
Technically, the law says it's not just the flying of it, there has to be an intent as well, so they've got to prove that if they want to mount a case. On the politics of all of this, Phil, I mean, we know the government is sort of sandwiched in between the Greens and Peter Dutton on this issue, has been for 12 months, and you can see it this week as well. How are the politics of this playing out for Labor? Is it actually going to cost them seats, do you think, or is it just more a difficulty that's...
I don't know. I think it depends on the level of engagement of the sort of middle voter. You know, clearly there's passionate views on, you know, at either end of this. And you can see, like, the Jewish vote is going to be very, you know, I think that'll have... I've heard, like, for example, in McNamara, the seat in Melbourne, the Greens are being eyeing off. I've heard that the Greens vote is completely tanked in McNamara because of
the Jewish vote there. Cold
day in hell before anyone of the Jewish vote would vote Green. And then, you know, vice versa, you know, not all Arab Australians, but, you know, some probably aren't going to vote Liberal. I think it's going to have effects on the margins, but I still get the impression, David, that people in the middle aren't waking up every day seized of this, you know, as a vote-changing issue. It's draining. The anger into the community is draining. It's debilitating. It's debilitating politics. It's just civil discourse has just disappeared around it. But I think, and I think people are finding it tiring. And
this is the thing. I don't know. Labor say it's not showing up in their focus groups. Most people aren't talking about it.
It's cost of living. 1, 2 and 3.
But is this overshadowing the government's efforts?
Well, it's stopping the government. It's stopping the government doing what it's doing, but that's politics, you know. Events, dear boy, events. You've got to deal with.
And when people see protests that maybe get out of hand, does the government get blamed for that, or have they done enough to?
I think it rebounds on the government. But from my discussions during the week, you know, there is a concern that there will be quite a drop in some Sydney seats like Blaxland and Watson, maybe 10% swings on the primary vote against Burke and Jason Clare. But, you know, the hope is that it will come back with in preferences. And so there are some areas where it's going to play a lot.
And then most of the country.
Most of the country.
What about Fatima Payman's party? It'll be this week that she announces this new party. It won't be called after her name, and it won't be, you know, a Muslim votes party, for example. But clearly it'll be targeting Labor and Green voters in seats like that.
And she's the figurehead, right? And she has created her profile on this one issue. So for her
how do you think they'll go?
Well, she has to try and now broaden that out. I'm sure Katina knows more about this.
Well, she's not up in WA.
She's not up in WA this time. She's got another 3 years. And I mean, the talk seems to be around Senate seats, not necessarily lower house. So they think that there's maybe
they've threatened that if it can win them some preferences in the Senate race.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, it's hard to see what you know, what the messaging would be if it's, as Nikki says, Fatima Payman's made her name on this particular single issue. She's trying to now to sort of really harvest the, youth vote, basically. But then you'd think that would be taking votes more off the Greens, perhaps, not necessarily Labor anyway.
It's a crowded field. And we've seen senators before branch out and try and become national parties and just fail spectacularly. You know, Bob Catter, we saw Nick Xenophon.
Even Jackie Lambie at the moment having problems.
She's trying to do it while the party's falling apart under, and Fatima Payman, to be honest, has been around 5 minutes. So I would, you know, it may play into preferences, but I think...
And she's got the preference whisperer, Glen Drury, is it?
Yes, but, you know, he forged his reputation before they changed the way that the Senate voting ticket works, and it's really different.
A couple of other issues. Energy, hydrogen, another blow this week. It was Andrew Forrest a little while ago who dialed back his plans on hydrogen. Origin Energy has now pulled out of its ambitious hydrogen hub project in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. What does this mean for the government's clean energy strategy.
I mean, Chris Bowen is still pretty buoyant about it. The government points to the fact that there are 13 hydrogen projects already operating, another 17 being built and more being looked at. So they're really saying, yes, this is a blow, but people are focusing on the things that are failing, not the more things that are actually going ahead. It is high profile. Orica, who is Origin's partner, they're still keen to get the hydrogen. They're looking for another partner. So I guess it depends whether they can find it.
Yeah, but it's just a reflection of the commercial reality. It's just really expensive to produce and difficult to store and difficult to ship. And we've seen Twiggy Forrest shelve his plans. He claims he's still devoted to it, but hydrogen remains the great dream. It really does. I mean, it'd be terrific if you could produce it for $2 a kilogram and ship it around the world and power everything off it, but it's...
Peter Dutton's great dream is nuclear power, but there's a bit of an issue in his home state. David Crisafulli, the LNP leader there, who's set to become Premier, if you believe the polls, in a few weeks, he still doesn't like it at all.
I think he'd make an outstanding Prime Minister. It doesn't mean that we agree on everything. He supports the Broncos. I support the Cowboys.
Friends can have a point of difference. In the end, we want the same outcome, that is cheaper electricity for families.
It's no biggie, just a small thing, just two nuclear reactors.
Yeah, I think it's slightly bigger than whether you support the same footy team, right? It's going to cost a bit more money than that, and
well,
be
it's
a
the
bit
future
harder
of the energy system.
Well, given Peter Dutton's timeline, Crisafulli has to A, win the election and then B, do about 3 or 4 terms before it becomes an issue. But
yeah, he's got a bit of time to work on him. The other one I just wanted your thoughts on, Katina, Dorinda Cox, Greens Senator. There, we've been reading all week about bullying complaints that have been made by various former staff members. 20 staff have gone, I think, from her office. Adam Bant, the Greens leader, is not standing her aside. He's leaving it to the Parliamentary Workplace Support Service, which is looking into this. Is that fair enough that he doesn't do anything, doesn't stand her aside?
Look, I don't think so. I think he needs to show action. The Greens sort of have a history of almost trying to push things under the carpet. As a party, this is bigger than just this issue. The other thing about the PWSS, it's basically toothless. It's as toothless as my daughter, who's busy bankrupting the Tooth Fairy this week. It can make recommendations. It can suggest that people take training or apologise to their staff. That's it. No proper sanctions on parliamentarians. The new body that's stronger, the IPSC, that's been legislated last month, hasn't started operations yet, and these complaints would still be dealt with by the PWSS under any circumstances anyway.
Yeah. Is this how it's meant to work, that the leader can just say, no, I'm not going to stand someone aside amidst all of this?
If it was one of the other major parties, she would be stood aside while an investigation took place. But the Greens operate under a completely different set of rules, and they've had a lot of cases like this of bullying and inappropriate behaviour to staff, and they just ignore it and hope it goes away. But it's obviously well, it seems to be systemic because there's one after another after another.
Right. Our panel, Katina Curtis, Phil Coorey, Nikki Savva, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with crowd-funded cartoonist, the one and only Glen Le Livre, and a very warm welcome back.
Morning, Mike.
Glen, the government announced this week that they were back in black, but not everyone thinks they're on the money. This surplus, are you a pig fan?
I'm a fan of this drawing. Look, David Pope has given us a pork chopper.
Yeah. This was so much simpler to explain back before we had food banks. The person here in the corner is saying, frankly, my dear, I don't give a ham.
Yeah, well, we're taking this baby to the docks and turning it into a submarine, Katie. Strap yourself in.
Pennies from heaven, Glen. This is your cartoon. It's raining yen.
Yeah, next budget, Jim, please. Throw cash.
Yep.
I prefer cost of living relief that doesn't leave a bruise.
Jim Chalmers in Pennies from Heaven. The poor little person here who's living in the tent going, ow, 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 ow.
Yeah, it hurts.
It hurts.
It hurts.
It hurts. I did love this cartoon by Matt Golding. The Coalition will always be better managers of getting headlines claiming they're better economic managers. It does seem like that, doesn't it? It's like there's a natural assumption that somehow the Coalition is a better manager, despite any sort of other evidence around.
To the contrary, yes. Don't let anybody in Canberra tell you size doesn't matter. particularly when it comes to column inches.
Yeah, that's right. Fiona Katowska's here. Top tips for what to do with a budget surplus. Convert it to cash so everyone can see in real life how much money you didn't spend, with little Jim here going, ta-da!
Build a giant solid gold statue so generations to come could commemorate this glorious achievement.
Yeah, 15.8 billion in 2024 with all the...
We're not worthy, we're not worthy.
And finally, gives something back to those most in need to help inspire fiscal rectitude.
It's the least we could do.
Yeah, back in black mugs are given to the homeless here.
I tell you what, something else you could do is spend it on a fleet of those sweet pork chopper easy miser rides.
Glen, climate change isn't just about the environment, it's about power politics, of course, and always has been, I suppose. Lovely Matt Golding cartoon. Run us through this.
The Coalition claims that renewables, contributing a record 74% to the East Coast energy mix, only reinforce the urgency of implementing their renewables delaying nuclear policy.
Yeah, right.
It's true, especially when it comes to renewables, every yin needs a Loy Yang.
Megan Herbert has picked up on what is fine and what is not fine as far as demonstrating against emissions.
When is a smokestack like a can of soup?
Yeah, that's right. So this is fine, and this is jail time and fine. Of course, she's picking up on the protests that threw vegetable soup, of course, at Van Gogh.
A lot of it going around. Mike, we're running out of things we can protest.
Lovely John Kadelka. OK, bushfire, you give me no choice but to pull the climate trigger.
Curse those extremist Greens. I think that's the same squirty gun Tanya uses to keep Chris Bowen from scratching up her furniture.
Glen, the planet might be heating up, but so is the conflict in the Middle East. Mark Knight has got Iran lighting the rocket, but there's a sort of a shadow approaching here.
Funny, Mike, but those don't look like kids' shoes.
No, they don't, do they? This is a Dean Alston cartoon from the West Australian.
Look at this, what a can-do type of guy. This is jumping out of the plane. And
yeah, I'll fix Hezbollah, then I'll come back and I'll fix the ABC.
He certainly will. Wow.
Somewhere over Lebanon. I did like this David Pope cartoon. Israel's just right to defend itself. It's a cereal box. I think this could possibly leave a very bad aftertaste.
It could, but high in fibre.
And it's permanent illegal occupation of Palestinian territories.
There you go. It's what you want from a inflated breakfast cereal.
What's the opposite of shrinkflation? Finally, you have the peace dove and the olive branch incarcerated.
Yes.
It's a very sad cartoon, this. The poor old dove doesn't look very happy at all. Glen, there's too much bad news around to say it's been a pleasure unpicking events this week, but it's been great to see you, and I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike. Back to you, David Speers.
Thank you, Glen. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations now. Katina.
Parliament's back on Tuesday for a very short week, only week in October. There's only 15 sitting days left this year, only 12 for the Senate, 11 for the Senate, and wise ministers wanting to get things done should not be counting necessarily on there being more sitting weeks next year.
It's a safe bet. Phil.
With the protests or vigils or whatever you want to call it today and tomorrow, I'd like to see some effort expended into calling on Iran and Hamas to release the 101 hostages, Israeli hostages still held. They always seem to go silent on that. If those people were released, then Netanyahu would have a big reason less to keep doing what he's doing, and that would then put the pressure on Hezbollah and Iran to also cease. If you're talking want to get rid of the cycle of violence, there's a good place to start. And let's have a bit of even-handedness here about who's actually behind this, who caused this, and as Nikki said, none of them care a fig about the Palestinian people. Those poor people have been pawns in this region, since the end of World War II.
Here. We have in the Parliament someone like Mark Dreyfus, who is the son and the grandson of Holocaust survivors. Mark has had a pretty terrible year all round, and yet he has to sit there and listen to Peter Dutton on the one side, accusing him effectively of being an appeaser, and the Greens on the other side effectively accusing him of being complicit in genocide. Now, this is reprehensible, it's offensive, it's anti-Semitic, and it has to stop.
Some strong observations to finish the show. Thanks for joining us all this morning. Finally, on something perhaps a bit lighter, it was one of those excruciating campaign moments. Just weeks out from the Queensland election, Premier Stephen Marles made 2 visits to the regional seat of Morani. But could he remember the name of his Labor candidate? We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Where's the party's candidate for Morani? The second press conference to be held at the election?
I'll find out where they are and let you know.
What's the name of your candidate for Morani?
I don't have that detail in front of me.
You don't know the name of the candidate that's running for your team in the seat that you're in today?
Susan? Yeah, of course, it's Susan. Yeah. I was with her the other night.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.